Ex-CIA agent breaks down why Putin is in trouble. In the past 30 days, the Ukrainian military has executed an effective counteroffensive in the eastern part of the country, dealing a significant blow to Russian President Vladimir Putin in the process. The Russian capital city of Moscow has retaliated with bombing attacks and the threat of considerably more severe consequences in the future. But how much longer can Putin maintain this charade? What steps will he take if he realizes that he has been defeated in the battle that everyone anticipated he would easily win? Ravi Agrawal, a former CIA analyst and intelligence officer focused on Russia, will have a chat with Andrea Kendall-Taylor, and you are invited to join them. Andrea Kendall-Taylor, a former CIA analyst and intelligence officer, discusses how Russian President Vladimir Putin is shifting the narrative of the conflict in Ukraine within Russia. According to a former CIA officer, Vladimir Putin of Russia could be assassinated by senior members of his military who are fed up with suffering catastrophic losses in Ukraine. This would bring an end to the conflict once and for all. In an exclusive and honest interview with The Sun, former chief of counterintelligence James Olson referred to Vladimir Putin as a dead man walking. Olson made this characterization in the context of the discussion. The situation is not improving at all. The veteran of the spy agency with 30 years of service added, "I believe Putin is currently in a no-win situation." Olson believes that Putin will never agree to remove his forces from Ukraine until Russia regains full authority over the 4 partially occupied territories that it illegally annexed in the fall. These districts were part of Ukraine before they were occupied by Russia. Olson was quoted as saying, "If Putin stays in power, there will be a long war because he will not give up. However, I do not believe that Putin is going to stay in power. I do not doubt that he will be removed from his position of power." Olson stated that the 70-year-old Russian leader could be assassinated or removed from power in an uprising. He stated, "I think Putin will be taken out, and I believe him. I would not rule out the possibility of an assassination." The former spymaster and novelist, who is currently a professor of international affairs at Texas A&M University, thinks that senior military officials in Russia are disgusted by the huge number of casualties that have occurred in Ukraine. Olson stated that if Putin's disgruntled generals turned against him, he would be a dead man walking. There is no way he could live through it. "I believe that the elimination of Putin is more likely than a military defeat," he stated. "I think it is more likely that Putin will be eliminated." According to an update that was provided by the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense on Sunday, it was reported that since February 2022, Russia has sustained around 200,000 casualties in Ukraine. This statistic accounts for both killed and wounded servicemen. The most recent estimate that has been provided comes from Ukraine and places the number of eliminated Russian servicemen at more than 175,000. This estimate is greater than the previous ones. In February of 2022, it was claimed that to conquer Ukraine in just 3 days. After more than 13 months of war, his men are now mired in a horrific quagmire and are engaged in street-to-street combat to gain control of minor cities in the east. If what Olson says is true, Putin's fate is inexorably linked to the outcome of the conflict, which could ultimately lead to his demise. This could be the case if one believes Olson. He remarked, "I believe that there is a strong undercurrent of opposition to Putin in the military and the intelligence services and among the oligarchs. I believe that there is a strong undercurrent of opposition to Putin in the oligarchs," he continued. "Putin is bleeding Russia and he cannot do that forever," the former chief of counterintelligence noted. Olson also warned that there is a real risk that the war would spill beyond the borders of Ukraine and swallow neighboring Moldova, which is widely regarded to be in Russia's crosshairs. If Putin continues to cling to power for much longer, there is a real risk that the war will engulf neighboring Moldova. According to the director of the CIA, Bill Burns, Russian President Vladimir Putin appears to have no intention of employing tactical nuclear weapons despite his conviction that he cannot afford to lose in Ukraine and his doubling down on the fight there. Even though Russian forces were unable to take Kiev and are having difficulty advancing along the main front lines of the battle in the Donbas region in the southeast, Vladimir Putin does not believe that his troops will be unable to overcome the Ukrainian forces, according to the director of the CIA, who spoke on Saturday. Burns stated during a conference that despite significant setbacks on the battlefield, Putin's faith in Russia's capacity to subdue the resistance of the Ukrainian people undoubtedly has not been broken. Burns stated, "I think he's in a frame of mind in which he doesn't believe he can afford to lose. I think he's in a frame of mind in which he can afford to lose." The head of the American intelligence organization stated that Vladimir Putin has had a very combustible combination of grievance, ambition, and insecurity regarding Ukraine for years, and that he has been stewing over the problem for years as well. Ukraine was a part of the Soviet Union in the past. Because he staked so much on the choices that he made to launch this invasion, Burns said, he has not been deterred by the stiff resistance demonstrated by Ukraine's armed forces in the war. The Russian leader has not been discouraged by the stiff resistance demonstrated by Ukraine's armed forces in the war. I believe that he is currently persuaded that increasing his efforts will still allow him to make headway. Nuclear weapons with a tactical role. Burns, a former U.S. ambassador to Russia who has devoted a significant amount of time to the study of the Russian leader, has stated that the CIA and other Western intelligence services do not detect any indication that Moscow is prepared to deploy tactical nuclear weapons to secure a victory in Ukraine or to target Kyiv's allies. Shortly after beginning the invasion on February 24th, Russia put its nuclear forces on high alert in preparation for possible use. Since then, Vladimir Putin and other Russian leaders have made warnings that are only somewhat veiled, hinting at a willingness to deploy Russia's tactical nuclear weapons if the West directly intervenes in the situation in Ukraine. These threats have been made public. According to Burns, we do not see any practical evidence at this point of Russian planning for the deployment or even potential use of tactical nuclear weapons. This is the conclusion reached by the intelligence community as a whole. In addition, he stated that given the kind of saber-rattling that we've heard from the Russian leadership, we can't take those possibilities lightly. As a result, as an intelligence service, we maintain a very sharp emphasis on those possibilities at a time when the stakes are very high for Russia. Burns did not provide any analysis of the current state of the battleground in Ukraine or make any projections regarding the outcome of the conflict. According to the director of the CIA, China, which the United States of America now views as its top opponent, is paying close attention to the lessons learned from the war in Ukraine and what those lessons might signify for Beijing's goal to gain control of Taiwan. Burns has stated that he does not believe Chinese President Xi Jinping has changed his intention of eventually integrating Taiwan with China, including through the use of force if it becomes necessary. However, he claimed that Beijing has been surprised by the poor performance of Russian military forces, as well as the tenacious resistance coming from the entirety of Ukrainian society, as well as the robust military backing that the West has supplied to Kyiv. Beijing's calculation about how and when they try to gain control of Taiwan, which China considers a renegade province, is probably being influenced by Russia's experience in Ukraine. I think they've been struck by how particularly the transatlantic alliance has come together to impose economic costs on Russia as a result of that aggression, he continued. I think they've been struck by how particularly the transatlantic alliance has come together to impose economic costs on Russia. Beijing has been unsettled by the fact that what Putin has done is to drive Europeans and Americans closer together, Burns said. What conclusions get drawn from all that remains a question mark, he said. I think the Chinese leadership is looking very carefully at all this, at the cost and consequences of any effort to use force to gain control over Taiwan. If you like it, kindly give your valuable response in our comment section below, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interesting and informative videos.